While a year later review video for the Samsung Galaxy Note 20 Ultra is in the works, while writing the script, I kept coming back to the same idea in many aspects about where Samsung's place really is in the smartphone market. And that, while Samsung might think so, they just simply lack the brand premium they think they have. And because I kept arriving at that conclusion while writing the review, I thought it was important to make this video first. So let's talk about it. Where does Samsung find its space in the market? Why, in my opinion, do they lack the brand premium they think they have? And perhaps more importantly, where do they go from here? Samsung sort of thinks of itself as the Apple of the Android space, and to a certain extent, that is true, especially here in North America. To give you an idea of the permeation Samsung has in North America, the question isn't so much do you use an iPhone or Android, but rather do you use an iPhone or Samsung? And looking at the marketing and market share of Samsung in the US, that made sense. As of the second quarter of 2021, Apple has 53% of the US market share for smartphones. In second place is Samsung at 26%. While that is comparatively small, and the gap in share between Samsung and Apple is rather large, it still represents the second majority, with the remainder percentage being taken up by a small mix of OnePlus, Lenovo, and even still LG. Samsung being so well known in the US as the alternative to Apple also makes anecdotal sense. In the US, where most people get their phones via their carriers through a lease contract, they're often swayed to either Apple or Samsung. While some carriers might have some OnePlus or other devices available like a Google Pixel, it's just simply not on the average consumer's radar. And for what it's worth, when you walk into say a T-Mobile store, you often see large, vibrant displays touting the latest from Samsung and Apple, usually on opposite ends of the store. The rest of the phones available are unceremoniously displayed and locked on basic tabletops throughout the store. Furthermore, I've only ever seen a Samsung or Apple commercial, never a OnePlus commercial, and maybe only one Google Pixel commercial. Like, ever. And it's been a few years. At the very least, Samsung is well known not only in the US, but across the world of course, just like Apple is. However, Samsung's decline isn't just seen in the US, but across the world as well, where quite recently, Xiaomi took second place in the world for smartphone market share, dethroning Samsung. We're going to come back to this point later. So we've established that Samsung wants to be like Apple, and certainly they probably see themselves as the Apple of the Android space. After all, Samsung probably offers the best hardware in its flagships still, from everything from screen to processors. Samsung might be the only one in the Android space with an actually decent ecosystem to directly compete with Apple, offering the best companion devices to their phones in general. Furthermore, Samsung tries teaming up with luxury brands to make special editions of their devices, like Thom Browne. It's okay if you didn't know who that was, I didn't either. The difference here is that Apple doesn't have to team up with luxury brands to create the sense of brand premium. Apple simply conveys themselves as the luxury, premium brand. Whether you agree with that being the case or not, it's still the core concept that many normie consumers believe, and it's fairly inescapable. Apple has done partnerships for special editions of their devices, namely the Product Red series of devices, a partnership between Apple and the charity of the same name. Special red-colored Apple devices were sold under this partnership, and the profits all went to a charity benefiting HIV/AIDS research. The core difference between the Thom Browne partnership with Samsung and Apple's Product Red partnership was the dynamic. Samsung used Thom Browne to try and elevate Samsung's own brand, but I'm gonna be real, I still don't really know what or who Thom Browne is, outside of a high-end fashion company, or why they're important. And what do they have to do with phones anyway? I believe the overlap between tech enthusiasts and fashionistas is fairly small, but the relationship dynamic was the complete opposite for Apple's partnership with Product Red. As opposed to Apple using Product Red to elevate Apple's own brand, Apple used their brand and all the mantras associated with it to try and elevate Product Red. This is an important difference to understand and shows why Apple understands its own place far more than Samsung does. Quite simply, Samsung feels as though they either have or need to convey they have a sense of premium associated with them like Apple does, particularly to succeed in the US market. And they try to, we've just talked about marketing and partnerships, but it goes deeper than that. So let's talk about the actual technology in the devices themselves. As previously mentioned, Samsung always brings competitive specs and pricing to go along with it to directly compete with Apple. So the hardware itself isn't a problem, and in many aspects like screen resolution and refresh rate, Samsung wins over Apple, but Samsung slowly taking away hardware features that used to be an objective benefit over Apple doesn't help this point. For example, there was a time when Samsung's latest flagships had a headphone jack and Apple's didn't. Another example is Samsung removing magnetic secure transmission, so now Samsung Pay is functionally no different than Apple Pay now. Samsung keeps tweaking their hardware and paring down its own features, so much so that Samsung becomes a more direct alternative to Apple and not a competitor with advantages. However, the differences become more clear delving into the OS. Samsung's flavor of Android is of course One UI, and to its credit, it often has some minor features added into it by Samsung that outpace the major Android releases. Samsung by far puts the most work into their version of Android than perhaps any other Android OEM, and while they do have a very good system, it comes at the cost of being fairly heavy, and being one of the last to market to update to the latest Android edition. Usually a lag time of about 4 to 6 months, which, at least here in the US, is further compounded by having to wait for carriers to tweak or verify Samsung's update, adding more to the delay. This is not only contrasted by iOS, where updates are released at the same time for everyone running a compatible iOS device, which spans a good 5 years back now, but as alluded to, Samsung drops support for older devices quicker than Apple does. Perhaps the issue here is fragmentation. Take a look at the list of phones slated to get Samsung's Android 12 update. While the list might not seem that long, especially when compared to Apple's 5 years worth of devices set to get iOS 15, Samsung has to deal with many different variations of hardware across all their devices to get working with Android 12. Apple has at least benefited from even their more budget phones running about the same hardware, making it easier for Apple to get updates running across older generations of iPhones. Whereas Samsung has to deal with a massive amount of hardware fragmentation and variation, creating more work on top of an already heavy OS. Moving down to a more superficial level, just examining the look and feel of Samsung's One UI is quite telling. The animations aren't as smooth as even its other Android competitors, and this is perhaps my biggest gripe: the advertisements in the stock Samsung apps like Weather and Samsung Pay. Like, seriously, what the hell is this? Have I not paid you enough money already, Samsung, that you feel the need to advertise to me to get extra revenue? There certainly aren't any ads in iOS's stock Weather and Apple Pay apps. The ads like this certainly cheapen the feel of the device. While Samsung has said they're going to be removing ads, as far as I can tell, that's only happened to South Korea so far. Although I'm honestly more offended that Samsung thought that was okay in the first place. Even Samsung's direct competitor in the Android space, Xiaomi, doesn't push ads in its Weather app. With this, Samsung is effectively triple dipping in terms of revenue, and yet they're still struggling, apparently. Not only is Samsung earning revenue through the purchase of the devices, but also through data being sold to third parties for advertisements, as well as advertisements in its own apps. And as aforementioned, even with this practice, it's still struggling with revenue. Talking about the addition of features as well, Samsung is in this weird in-between. Samsung's Chinese competitors are more than willing to push out even somewhat experimental features relatively quickly, and the demand from the market helps push the development of the feature and helps determine whether or not it's a feature even worth investing in future devices. Apple, on the other hand, is notorious for being almost frustratingly slow at adding in hardware features, but at the benefit of things working really, really well when they do, as Apple benefits from the maturity of the development. Samsung is somewhere in between. Samsung is rarely, if ever, the first to market with a feature, and when they do implement it, it doesn't always work the best. The most recent example of this is an under-display camera. Currently, Samsung only features one in its new Z Fold 3, a device you pay an $1,800 premium for. Yet Xiaomi, with their Mi Mix 4, released a couple of weeks before the Z Fold 3 on August 10th, already outcompeted Samsung with their under-display camera, with the Mi Mix 4's camera producing a much clearer, brighter image. And the Mi Mix 4 is also $1,000 cheaper. While both pictures obviously aren't stellar, as it's clear UDC tech isn't quite ready for prime time yet, Samsung gets outdone in regions like China because of companies like Xiaomi being more ballsy with experimental features and using that demand to drive development. Furthermore, Samsung, because of their insistence to charge a premium over even similarly spec'd phones, loses out in a market like China due to the cheaper option. So with all this in mind, where does that leave Samsung? In recent years, despite having some truly remarkable devices like their flagship S series and making strides in their Fold and Flip series, as previously mentioned, Samsung is still on the decline, and the problem is multifaceted. In the US, Samsung doesn't command the brand premium like they think they do, and they don't quite know how to achieve it either, despite essentially being the only other recognized smartphone brand in the US. In other parts of the world, Samsung is beaten by companies who don't charge a superficial premium for their devices and offer similar, if not better specs. Samsung is in quite the spot, and while they're far and away from going the way of LG, it's best to right the ship early. So here's some suggestions. Obviously, Samsung won't listen to or see this, but I'm also interested in knowing if you agree with my assessment. So leave a comment down below with your thoughts. Alright, the first of which is Samsung needs to ratchet down their prices. While that might seem counterintuitive in terms of improving revenue, the increase in sales volume could potentially make up for it. Samsung just simply does not command the brand power to upcharge a premium for their devices. Furthermore, Samsung really does need to do some fine refinements to their One UI, like animation improvements and the big one, removing ads. Drives me up the wall. Another aspect is Samsung needs to stop feature paring down their devices year after year and create more of an objectively better advantage over the likes of, say, Apple or its other competitors. This can be in major hardware like a headphone jack, but also small things like the MST functionality I was talking about earlier. Finally, and this is the big one, Samsung needs to streamline its devices. While Samsung's budget phones do certainly serve a purpose, is there really a particular reason the A series has so much variation between it? Samsung should actually make do more like Apple in this aspect, and that while having flagships is of course necessary and still wanted, the budget area of Samsung needs to be trimmed. Have one super budget device that has the benefit of having, say, the same processor as a flagship device in order to reduce the hardware fragmentation across Samsung's full lineup. So with that, that's going to wrap it up. Leave a comment down below about any other aspects for Samsung you think might be problematic, and what you think Samsung might be able to do to fix it. And of course, stay tuned for the long-term Note 20 Ultra review. Thank you all so much for watching. If you liked what you saw, make sure you leave a like and subscribe, hitting that notification bell. It helps us out a lot, and you'll get notified whenever we put something new out. We try to shoot for at least 2 videos per week. If you'd like to follow us on Twitter, follow us at tech_4_thought, and check us out on Instagram at tech_4_thought. And if gaming is more your thing, check out our affiliate, Culture of Gaming, at cultureofgaming.com.